November 1989, an unexpected acceleration of history has caused the already cracking Soviet bloc to fall apart. The crowds of Berliners crossing the wall between the two German states will forever symbolize this event. Who could imagine that less than 2 years later, citizens, them again, would bring down the statues of Lenin in the very birthplace of communism? This other symbol is forever attached to the disintegration of the USSR. Between those two dates, a string of events happened which some thought unpredictable and others inescapable. The first event in this series took place 2,500 miles from Moscow on two ships battered by a storm in the Mediterranean off the coast of Malta. It was the first meeting between Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and George Bush, the newly elected President of the United States.
It was very funny because it was a big storm, and they couldn't get the ships to meet each other, and Bush got seasick, and Gorbachev got seasick, and everybody was sick.
The two men sailing towards each other on that tumultuous sea were the leaders of the world's two mightiest superpowers. George Bush, who had been President of the United States for less than a year, had succeeded Ronald Reagan, the man who referred to the Soviet Union as the evil empire, and brought the nuclear confrontation with the Soviet bloc to a climax. Would Bush continue the politics of his predecessor? Mikhail Gorbachev had been Secretary General of the CPSU since 1985. He was then 54 years old. He introduced a younger spirit into the party leadership and started radical reforms. In foreign affairs, he lifted the Iron Curtain, allowing satellite countries of the USSR such as Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia to regain a hold on their national destinies. On the domestic front, he began to democratize the country, launching two revolutionary catchwords, glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost meaning freedom of speech, perestroika meaning restructuring of the political, economic and social system.
People ask, what is perestroika? Well, it's doing your work earnestly. That's what perestroika is about. It's helping others. It's feeling the shoulders of others. That's socialism.
As soon as Gorbachev said, now you can speak out, it was the end. After that, there was no way of stopping anything or going back. It was too late. Everything flowed from that moment.
By 1989, however, the outcome was unconvincing. Although Soviet society was starting to breathe, although press censorship had been abolished, individual liberties were more respected and arbitrary internments had disappeared, the daily life of Russians was deteriorating. That was when the Malta summit took place.
Gorbachev arrives at this Malta meeting in an extremely weakened position.
He had one crucial goal, to obtain from the Americans the end of nuclear escalation, for moral reasons of course, but also for economic ones. The drastic reduction of military expenses in his country would help him finance his famous perestroika and raise the living standards of his people.
Not only the European countries, but the whole world was mired in this Cold War. You have to realize that the USSR and the United States have engulfed dozens of billions of dollars in the arms race. Just imagine what could have been done with all this money.
During the months before the summit, the Bush administration was divided down the middle. So President Bush, and this is where I played a small role, brought his whole commando, everybody, to Camp David. That's the presidential vacation home. And invited to speak to his whole commander, two people, representing different American academic views of Gorbachev. Professor Richard Pipes of Harvard, who didn't trust Gorbachev, didn't believe in Gorbachev, thought the whole perestroika was a trick, and Stephen Cohen at Princeton. Cohen in '89 with the well-known view that Gorbachev represented for the United States a historic opportunity to end the Cold War. And after Pipes spoke and I spoke, they asked us questions. And it was clear to me immediately that the president had made up his mind, that he was going to end the Cold War with Gorbachev at Malta on those ships.
Bush spoke this famous sentence: "The USSR is no longer our enemy. We need to get rid of the view of one another as enemies." I in turn said the same thing. We shook hands. So this gesture and this common speech symbolized the end of the Cold War. It was to us all a great achievement. A question immediately came to our minds: how shall we act in this new environment? It was difficult to answer.
It was in this new political context that Mikhail Gorbachev went to Vilnius in Lithuania, where thousands of protesters demanded the country's independence. He went with his wife Raisa to assess the situation, which was becoming dangerous, because Lithuania was an integral part of the Soviet Union. Like the other two Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia, it was annexed by the USSR in 1940.
When Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev came here, I accompanied him everywhere, through the streets, on the squares, and to meet with the intellectuals. Every time he would ask the same question: "Do you really want to leave the Soviet Union?" And he would get the same unanimous yes. What else could they answer but yes? It was self-evident.
Back in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev drew another conclusion from his trip for his party colleagues.
When Gorbachev came back from Vilnius, he addressed the Politburo with enthusiasm. He said, "Everything is okay. They want to remain with the Russians and belong to the Soviet Union. There is no problem." However, 2 months later, Lithuania declared its independence unilaterally.
For the first time in the history of the USSR, one of its republics was breaking away. It was a serious matter because it was likely to be contagious. Mikhail Gorbachev played for time, sticking to the rules he set himself when he came to power.
What matters for Gorbachev, and which is, to me, proof of his exceptional skills, was his attachment to some moral principles, his aversion of the use of force, his training. Being trained as a lawyer, he held the primacy of the law in high regard.
I solemnly swear to serve the peoples of our country, to act strictly according to the Constitution.
In order to continue his reforms legally, Gorbachev had himself elected President of the USSR by the Congress of the People's Deputies. In the same stride, he abolished the political monopoly of the Communist Party, introducing a multi-party system into the Soviet Union.
Everything had to be radically reformed. I was aware of that. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev thought so too. But he was more in favor of making improvements and amendments. He used to tell me, "Watch out, Alexander. This party is such a monster, you may lose control over it in no time."
This system was at the end of its tether. It was outdated. This was obvious from the fact that it led an authoritarian policy. The Communist Party and the administrative apparatus exerted absolute control. As you can observe, all of my innovative steps were countered by the nomenclatura. It was always the same thing. Instead of governing the affairs and implementing the perestroika, the Communist Party set about to slow down the whole